What if the real reason poverty persists is not a lack of effort, but a lack of accountability for results? Good morning, and welcome to Disrupting Poverty Through Leadership that Delivers AM Results, that Deliver Results AM Talk Show. I'm your host, Dr. Tekemia Dorsey, and today we're tackling a critical leadership gap: accountability. Today's episode is entitled Accountability That Drives Results, Aligning Leadership, Data, and Agenda 2030 for Real Impact. Say that real fast. Because without accountability, strategies drift, funding is wasted, and outcomes remain unchanged. Let's connect this to Agenda 2030. The Sustainable Development Goals, known as SDG, especially SDG 1, which is no poverty, SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth, SDG 10, reduce inequalities, and SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. All require more commitment. Not only do they require more commitment, they require measurable accountability. Because here's the reality: many leaders are accountable for activity, but not for outcomes. And that's the gap that we're closing today. Let's begin by confronting the difference between responsibility and accountability. And let's be clear: responsibility says, I'm involved, I'm here, whoop, whoop, over here. Accountability says, I own the outcome. I am responsible if things went great, and I am responsible if things didn't go so great. Distinct difference. A workforce initiative had multiple partners, and everyone had roles, right? But when outcomes stalled or staled, no one took ownership. Not my problem, not my fault. That wasn't my department. That was somebody else. The result, because the outcome stale and no one took ownership, there were delays, confusion, and limited impact. But when leadership shifted to clear accountability, specific owners for outcomes surfaced. There remains defined targets and regular performance reviews, all things that are tied to accountability and ownerships. And in a long and short of it, progress accelerated. The truth: shared work still requires clear ownership. And the key there again is the word shared. Not I, not you, not me, but us. So, if accountability is the missing link, what does effective accountability actually look like? Great question. Accountability begins with clarity. Leaders must define what success looks like, how it would be measured, and who is responsible. An organization align its strategy with SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 1, which is no poverty. Instead of broad goals, they define wage increase growth by X percentage within 12 months. This distinct, specific, shifted focus went from activity to results because there was a timeline and a percentage that they were looking to achieve. Because vague goals produce vague outcomes, but defined outcomes is only the beginning because measurement must follow. Data is not just for reporting. It is for accountability because leaders must track progress in real time, obviously for measurement purposes, gaps in performance, obviously to see what's working and what's not, and outcomes across populations. Are we hitting our benchmarks? Do we need to go back to the drawing board? Do we need to redefine what it is that we're targeting? A program recently that I work with tracked participation not by long term results. And when they shifted to tracking, they were able to identify retention, they were able to identify wage progression, and they were able to identify areas of advancement. These were all critical gaps that were identified, and they were able to make a pivot and adjust their strategy because data reveals truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And in other episodes, we also talked about the importance of data tracking and what it means when leaders track data and how leaders can use data to improve their return on investment, which means return on income, and other areas to really ensure that they're moving in an upward and progressive manner. And accountability must extend beyond organizations to systems. That word system in itself is scary because we typically think in silo or small pairs or anything beyond maybe three pieces. But in order for things to have that longevity and impact and performance, we have to move to a um, systems thinking. Agenda 2030 emphasizes system-wide accountability. That means government aligning policy with outcomes, businesses aligning operations with equity, nonprofits aligning services with impact. Recently, speaking with a colleague, she was working with a regional coalition around SDG, Sustainable Development Goals 10. Now, as a reminder, SDG 10 is focused on reduce inequalities. She shared that this organization or this coalition, they created shared metrics, they created joint reporting, and they created collective accountability structures. Ooh, that sounds important. And it is because the results was simple: coordinated action, and measurable progress. No one person and no one organization and no one leader was responsible for this entire project. It was all hands on deck, all in their respective area, all working within their respective fields for a joint cause. And systems change systems change required shared accountability frameworks. And this regional coalition, from my understanding, hit those metrics and those goals. But accountability without transparency cannot be trusted. And two keys there: accountability, transparency. And transparency is often hard for leaders and organizations because you don't want people to know the deep and dirty secret. Excuse me. You want to be able to keep that in house. But sometimes transparency leads to other people getting involved and wanting to be empowered and more hands on deck. So accountability requires visibility. Leaders must be willing to share progress openly, acknowledge those failures. Listen, what worked? What didn't work? Where can we close the gaps? Address strategies publicly. I know in terms of elected officers or elected leaders, this is what the people want. They want shared progress. They want to know what's going on. They want acknowledged failures. Hey, I take responsibility for that. It doesn't make a leader look weak by being accountable for things that didn't work. And they want a what strategies to correct the wrongs or correct what was identified to be shared publicly, even if they don't necessarily get it all. Because if not, it leads to a huge backlash. Recently, an organization began publishing impact reports, both successes and challenges. Again, both sides lead to harmony. And by doing so, their organization increased the trust the public had with them. The engagement improved and their partnership strengthened. And those are three key factors that everyone wants to be a part of because transparency turns accountability into credibility. Whew, it's a lot for first thing in the morning, but it's needed, especially in today's time and culture. And finally, accountability must be sustained over time. Sounds hard, but it's not really. It's very doable. Accountability is not a one time effort, it requires continuous monitoring, leadership commitment, and alignment with long term goals, especially with the Agenda 2030 timeline. And if you're tuning in today for the first time, the Agenda 2030 timeline means that Agenda 2030 would like to eliminate poverty by 2030 or significantly reduce it. In today's culture, I'm hoping for the best, but we're kind of going backwards in time. So that timeline might be shifted a little, but you never know. We've seen stranger things. And accountability sustains intentional starts. So let's bring this into action because you know what we love? That's right, a leadership challenge. Here's your leadership challenge: identify one outcome in your work that currently lacks clear accountability. Yep, I will repeat. Hold on. Identify one outcome in your work that currently lacks clear accountability. Assign ownership and define measurable targets. Assign ownership and define measurable targets. Create a system to track and report progress consistently. Because here's the truth: leadership is not measured by intention, it is measured by results. And results require accountability. You got it. That's it. If this episode challenged how you think about leadership accountability, follow Disrupting Poverty Through Leadership That Deliver Results AM Talk Show on YouTube. Share one outcome you are taking ownership of, and tag a leader who is committed to results, not just responsibility. Because disrupting because disrupting poverty requires more than effort. It really does. It requires accountable leadership that delivers measurable change. Thank you for tuning in for another dynamic episode of my AM Talk Show. If you have not heard the previous episodes, please go back, rewind this, download, take notes, pass it on to a friend, and drop below where you are in your journey of becoming more of an effective leader, disrupting poverty in your area or your life or your family or all of the above. Until next time, have a great day. Thank you and be blessed.